everybody doing today? Okay, good. That's a little bit better. Hey, I'm Tony Hofmann. I'm the Public Works Director, City of Overland Park, Kansas. Talking about today a very near and dear topic for all of us on the panel. A lot of you in military or have transitioned out. I see a lot of ex-military out there. Talking about transitioning veterans into the architectural, engineering, construction community. Really a continuation of what General Odland talked about yesterday and Neil Wright just got done talking about. I want to thank SAME National, Joe Schradell, Nick Desport in particular, and all the folks of bringing this to these panels to JETC. We can only grow from here. Without their help at the national level, we couldn't do it because the transition of our military veterans is a very important topic that often doesn't get a lot of press. And the value of SAME is showing in addressing these issues. Very, very privileged to have the panel today. A lot of moderators don't really know their panel members. I have worked with Dr. Lieutenant Colonel retired Art DeGroat, who really is the subject matter expert on transition. He did his dissertation on transition. He's a director of military affairs at Kansas State University, a couple hours down the road from here. He'll be talking today. Master Sergeant Jason Snell, been working with him for about 3 years. He's the non-commissioned officer in charge at Fort Riley, Kansas for the transition program there. And then retired Chief Master Sergeant Tamara Olsen, been working with her for a couple years. She's part of the Pikes Peak Post and their integration with Fort Riley, Kansas, and assisting transitioning soldiers at that installation. So the three of us, or the three of these astute panel members, will talk about various items related to the transition of military veterans. Transition of our military veterans out of uniform back into the civilian sector is one of the most challenging and misunderstood concepts. We are going to help clarify a few of those things today. So, before we start the panel, why is the transition important? How is it relevant to the Society of American Military Engineers? Look no further than the mission of SAME. Anybody want to take a crack at the mission of SAME? Won't put you on the spot. I'll cover it for you. SAME leads collaborative efforts to identify and resolve national security infrastructure-related challenges. What better way to potentially bring veterans that served and protected that national security to come back into that industry potentially with jobs, okay? So it's important to the relevancy of the society. Why is it important to the architectural, engineering, construction industry? A lot of private sector, private firms out there. I would tell you, you may be missing out on talent that can enhance your own company bottom line, and you will better understand that pool of talent with today's panel. Why is it relevant to SAME? SAME is uniquely positioned with the amount of veterans. And one of the things we started at the post level back in 2014 with the Greater Kansas City Post is we said we got to do a better job. The unemployment rate of lower enlisted was about double the national average. So we said, tired of just giving out Chiefs and Royals tickets, which are great. It's a feel-good thing for maybe, 2, 3, 4 hours. Is that really helping veterans? So we said, let's start panels with veterans that comprise SAME. Let's go down to Fort Riley, Kansas, Fort Leavenworth, and talk to transitioning soldiers on those installations and have a meaningful discussion on what they can really expect through our transition, okay? Not that we have all the answers, but let's tell them what they can really expect for their transition. We've been doing that for 4.5 years. Through Nationals efforts, we've expanded that to Joint Base Lewis McChord and the Mount Tacoma Pikes Peak Post, getting veterans from those SAME posts to talk to veterans both on the Joint Base Lewis McChord side of the house, both Air Force and Army. And we've done it at Fort Carson with the Pikes Peak Post. So altogether, about 500 soldiers, sailors, airmen, or Marines that we've had meaningful discussions with. Our metric for success at those warrior transition panels is simple. They walk out of there with a better understanding of what they really need to do for their transition and can apply it during the transition assistance programs that they're in with their respective services. So we are at the grassroots level of that. The other thing we get to do is tell them about the value proposition that the Society of American Military Engineers has. Talk about credentialing, talk about General Odland addressing the skill shortages in the construction industry. We're at the base level of having those meaningful conversations and can tell them about all the various programs that SAME brings value. So we do get to promote the Society of American Military Engineers with that. Lastly, most importantly, and I'll turn it over to the panel here, why is it important to the veteran? okay? Why is it important to the veteran? Anybody have seen the book Tribe by Sebastian Junger? This is not a solicitation, but pretty easy read, 136 pages. You want to understand, this comprises a variety of items. If you want to whittle it down to 3 pages, I need the Cliff Notes version, okay? I'm an ex-Army guy. Page 100 to 103. And I'm going to read a quote from this. In tribal cultures, combat can be part of the maturation process, I was told by Sharon Abramowitz, who was in the Ivory Coast with the Peace Corps in 2002. When youth return from combat, their return is seen as an integral part to their own society. They don't feel like outsiders. In the United States, we valorize our vets with words and posters and signs, but we don't give them what's really important to Americans. What really sets you apart as someone who is valuable to society, we don't give them jobs. All the praise in the world doesn't mean anything if you're not recognized by society as someone who can contribute to valuable labor, okay? And that's part of the veteran challenge because our society here in the US doesn't really know how to reintegrate our veterans who have left that civilian society. And now they're rejoining what they once were before they came into the military, okay? So we're gonna talk about that today. These are the learning objectives. Won't go through a lot of those. You've seen them, they've been posted. More importantly, here's our agenda. Art de Groot, again, who's studied the transition process for 6 or 7 years, really is. I learn something every time I hear Art speak. We'll talk about the overview of the veteran transition, okay, for about 20 minutes on what he's learned in his journey, okay? Master Sergeant Jason Snell will talk about the DoD, Department of Defense requirements and interaction with military installations, and the interaction we've had with the Greater Kansas City Post of F.SAME for 4.5 years. And then Tamara is going to talk about best practices at the post level on how posts can integrate transition panels near military installations and Society of American Military Engineers engineer posts. So that sets the stage. Without further ado, Art de Groot's going to talk to you. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for your interest in this subject. Thanks for being here, and Tony, thanks for organizing all this, and my esteemed panel members. What I want to do is share just a little bit about why I'm involved in this stuff. As Tony said, I'm a retired military officer, so I don't come at this transition. I lived through a very difficult transition as a result of a premature death of my wife, and I could not continue as a single parent. And so I went through a very difficult transition myself, so I had this experiential component. I also have this motivation of continuing to serve our veterans because my uniform service was kind of cut short, but I continue to serve in my new capacity as a higher education person and a social scientist. I'm not an advocate of veterans because I am one. I'm an advocate because of the knowledge that they're special people, and I want to share that with you on what I have discovered in the last 6 years of social science research and application. I have helped several thousand veterans transition, post 9/11 generation veterans, so I also have a practice in doing this. At Kansas State University, we have the largest population of military-connected students in the state of Kansas. We have over 2,000 military-connected, and 1,800 of them are veterans on the GI Bill, so I work every day at a university helping through higher education veterans transition. So I bring the research side, the lived experience side, and as well as the practice. So I want to share a little bit about that with you. The first thing I would say, and I'm going to talk about what we're seeing out here about this process of veterans transition, not so much why. In the Q&A, if you want to know, if I say something and it's different than what you think, and you want to know why, offline or in the Q&A, I can tell you 1,000 reasons why it is that it is, but for time's sake, I'm just going to tell you what's going on with veterans transition, not so much the why, but I promise you I can answer the why is this happening. The first thing is veterans are a very lucrative talent pool. I'll tell you why they're valuable people, but there's almost 4 million veterans that are out there in various stages of transition. It's a large demographic, and about 230,000 a year are transitioning from all the services. They're geographically distributed all over the country, all different skill sets, 5 different services. So it is a bona fide talent pool for every industry, and every industry is looking at them as this. One of the things I've discovered in this work is everybody, every business, every nonprofit organization, every community, everybody knows a veteran that's kind of the alpha veteran in their community, and they think they know everything about the next generation. But what I have discovered through social science research is each generation of veteran is different. I'm a Gulf War Era I veteran. I fought in the first Gulf War, even though I stayed in after post 9/11, but I really can only understand well my generation. And so the talent pool we're talking about is the post 9/11 era veterans, those that have served voluntarily since September 11, 2001. So one of the points I want to make is not all veterans and each generation of veterans are the same. And this post 9/11 era generation, which the Bureau of Labor Statistics calls Gulf War Era II, these are different people, and for three basic reasons. First of all, it's a different generation. It's the millennials and then the newer generation of people, age 21 to 35, 37. So these are people who grew up in a different time. They're digital natives. Technology is not something they go to school and learn. They just know that from birth. So in many ways, they are very different people generationally, and that affects them as they transition. Secondly, military service has changed quite a bit, and I've studied extensively the impact of military service on the human life course from every generation, and military service is in itself different. This is the first generation of military service members who were, because of digital technology, were co-present in the home front and the battlefront at the same time. Because of Skype and email, social media, our service members today are actually on the battlefields in Afghanistan and Iraq, and at the same time, 2 hours later, they're on Skype at home managing their families. This is a psychological load on people that previous veterans really never had to deal with. There's a myriad of things that are different about the nature of the service. This is the first generation of service members who go back to war 3, 4, 5 times. The old model had been for other generations. You go to war, you stay there till the war's over, you come home, and spend the rest of your life trying to figure that out and moving on. These soldiers go back and forth multiple times. There's a different lifestyle, there's a different psychological demand, and all of that kind of takes its toll, and it affects their transition, what we're seeing. And lastly, as you well know, you're representing the workforce. The workplace has changed. The economy is different, and where we find talent is different, and what we expect our talent to do, and the psychological contract of our employees is different. They're not 20-year employees for many cases. They're kind of transactional. They're there for a few years. They do some great work. They move on to other companies, and you're constantly in a constant talent acquisition model. It's not the career models that it used to be. So for all of these things and others, this all affects veterans as a talent pool. But again, I still say it makes a great business decision to hire veterans. So one of the major paradigms, we're seeing a new paradigm in how veterans transition. And based upon the things that I just said. Snell can kind of talk about is, as we started seeing 2006, 2007, 2008, as the unemployment problem that Tony talked about was getting really big. It was a national social issue on veterans transition. We were looking at the military and seeing which companies are at the back door, at the back gate at these posts and recruiting. And the ones that were going were the ones that traditionally were defense contractors and things like that. And that's really, that industry has really shrunk. So what I've discovered here, I've made a little chart, it's complicated, but if you look at, prior to 9/11, about 80% of military talent, and when they left the uniform, were absorbed in the Allied military career field. They became Department of Defense workers, they became defense industry people, they became consultants, contractors, and so for many decades and many generations, the Allied military career field is where most of our veterans were found work after the uniform service. And if you think about it, so what they did in the military, if they were a Bradley fighting vehicle mechanic in the uniform in the Army, and they got out and went to work for a contractor as a civilian mechanic, their skill set from the military directly translated to what they're doing after the military, and that's not the case any longer. This industry, the defense industry, has shrunk, And now we're seeing the majority of our veterans are transitioning into different fields: hospitality, financial services, construction, things that they typically in large numbers did not find themselves going into for employment and careers. So that's kind of a different thing. We've also seen that, that veterans today are serving shorter periods of time, maybe 1 or 2 enlistments, because it's the compression of things in time. In 3 or 4 years, most veterans have 2 tours of combat. I was in the military for 22 years with 1 tour of combat in the middle of it all. So we're seeing that they're doing a lot more faster, and then they're getting out earlier than staying for a full 20-year career. Historically, about 78% of people that ever serve the military stay through retirement 20 years. So that hasn't really changed. So the majority of people that serve the military don't stay through retirement. They leave and do something else for the rest of their lives, productive, before retirement. The significant part of that is, like myself and Tony and the Master Sergeant, Tamara, is that when we retire, we have health care for life, so we don't have to ask for that for our employer. We already receive retirement compensation, so we can afford to take a $40,000 pay cut to enter the civilian private workforce because we're being subsidized by our military retirement. But 80% of the veterans today don't have those benefits, and they really rely on their employer for those kinds of things. So that's a little bit of how this has kind of changed. My real work is on this. I'm trying to untangle this knot, and I published my research about veterans transition as a human life event, and that's the work that Tony was talking about. So early on, we kind of looked at it as just a career transition for these people, and then we slowly realized, you know what, it's a life transition. The military is a lifestyle. The RAND Corporation found that 80-some% of people that serve in the military have done it because they're from a military family. Their fathers or mothers or aunts and uncles, so it's a family business. So since they were little children, all they ever thought about was going in the military. So they really haven't really thought about, well, I'm gonna go in the military for 4 years and come out and be an engineer or be an architect. So these are people who have thought about and live within a military lifestyle from, in many cases, since birth. And so it's a huge social readjustment for them to find themselves into civilian life as an adult, mostly with families, and then entering the workplace and communities out as a civilian. So it's really a complex life event. It's not just a career change. But again, having said that, it's not to dissuade us from not wanting these people, because I'll show you in a few slides how incredibly talented and valuable they are. An interesting thing, and one more point I'd make on this, is I discovered in 1967, there was this famous sociological, psychological study called the Holmes and Rahe Social Readjustment Scale. It's still used today, and it lists the 43 major life events that adults go through. Everything from death of a spouse to change of job. I mean, there's 43 life events that everyone in this room has gone through, probably 10 or 15 of them. I've gone through 39, which is kind of interesting as a side note for the bar later. What's interesting of those is veterans transition is not considered a life event. Has never been studied as a life event. We don't know. If you said death of a spouse, divorce, you could go to a psychiatrist, psychologist, a sociologist, a caseworker, social worker, and there's science about what that life event is and how best to help someone go through that. There is no science on this, what we're talking about, up until recently. We're just starting now. And so my study was an exploratory phenomenology to discover what is this thing called veterans transition, because it's heretofore never been really examined. So we're trying in earnest to help these people transition by assisting them, but yet we don't really know what it really is. So my work is kind of important to the point that I'm trying to get that out there about understanding what that is. The second and last part about that comment I would make is the second part of that research from '67 was they went back and they looked at like 8,000 people that went through those events, and they actually developed a scale of how stressful those 43 life events were and put them in rank order. So the worst one was the death of a spouse, and that was 100 points, and it goes all the way down to the bottom. Then they discovered that if someone's going through a life event within 1 year, if you added all the things that are going on, and if it was greater than 300, it was proven to be physiologically or psychologically so stressful it could cause illness. And so what I did is just recently is I went back and looked at the 8 veterans that I studied extensively for 6 years on their transition, and I just added up what their stress levels would have been based upon that scale, and they were in like the 700s. I mean, they should be like just absolutely messed up, physically sick, and psychologically really troubled because it's that stressful of a transition. The moral of that story is this is a complex thing. It's a life event that we're just starting to understand. And this is whether you're retired from 30 years or been in for Army for 3 years or Marines for 3 years. We have to recognize that these are great people going through a very stressful thing, and we have to be empathetic and help them and recognize that part of their transition, not just the talent acquisition to get them into our firms. A lot of this is caused by this issue, and the Master Sergeant can kind of talk about this, and there's been a lot of reform. They simply just don't have a lot of time. These people are serving to almost the last minute in their uniform, serving their units, serving their tribes, serving our country, serving us, and they have a very minimal window of which to transition. And even we've been, by legislation and by policy and practice, we've been expanding that window to give the veterans more time to think about leaving and what they're going to be doing. And so we're getting better on that, but for the most part, we have not given them. I see students every day just walk in, and they were in Afghanistan 8 days ago, and now they're on Kansas State University campus. I mean, they're literally getting out that fast, and there's still a lot of that going on, despite efforts to kind of slow it down. So you have to recognize that they're going to show up in a hurry, maybe not fully ready to interview and compete. I won't brief this slide, but it proves that I've really mapped this thing out. But if you look at it, in the military, from human resource development, from a recruiting standpoint, the military spends an enormous amount of time, have very high standards of who they bring in, what talent they bring in the military, and then they take about 18 months to produce a civilian and institutionalize and train them to be a world-class professional military person. And again, and I challenge it, and then on the back end, we're not seeing that, there's not that kind of investment in time, nor can there be, because these people have to serve. So there's really some difference between military service from a human resource development standpoint and then this transition. So there's a big front end of turning them into military people, and that's resocializing them to a military way of life. And there's not really that resocialization component on the backside. There's a lot of work on talent development and certifications and skills, but that resocialization really doesn't happen so much in these programs while they're in their uniforms. One of the things I've discovered from a very prominent British sociologist, Ruth Jolly, was she's proposed a real process. She says all of these people can go through 3 stages, and I think this is useful for you to think about if you're a veteran that's going to be transitioning, or if you're someone who's going to assist veterans transition, or you're an employer who's going to hire veterans. It's really not helpful to think of them in these stages. They go through a confrontation stage when they're thinking about, I'm going to leave the military. It may be voluntary, it may be involuntarily. It may be voluntary because they're retiring, but even then there's a stress. So how there's a series of issues as they confront departure that affect their transition. Then they go through this disengagement process of actually leaving, and they start to figure out, okay, when I move out of government quarters, how do I buy a house or rent a house? When I'm off of military health care, do I have the knowledge to go shop and choose a health care plan for myself and my family? These disengagement tasks are very profoundly important to them stepping into your employment. And then there's the resocialization thing that I just talked. We're seeing nationally, there's a bit of a spike in retention problem with veterans who have otherwise been placed in that 12 to 18 months. Despite great performance, a lot of veterans are walking away from their positions. It has nothing to do with job performance. They've never really felt like they belonged in the firm. They never felt comfortable in the cubicle. They never connected with their coworkers. So we're realizing that resocialization into the workplace and into the corporate culture is equally important as just finding the talent match to bring them in and assigning them meaningful work. Now, I've consulted with probably 8 major firms to include Burns and McDonald here about looking at their onboarding and how do veteran employees get resocialized? Do they get added things? Can they have a veteran employee network where once a month, sponsored by HR, they can have a little brown bag lunch on company time and work through some of these issues as peers. And they're getting great results in terms of retention by recognizing that the veterans' resocialization is still happening once they're in your companies. So I always make this chart and say, veteran talent has been proven. I mean, I can go through all of the research on human capital, and skills are sector specific. So if a combat medic on the battlefield got out tomorrow and wants to join the city of Overland Park and be an EMT, you would think a combat medic and an EMT, same thing, and their skill set. But when you realize what EMTs can do by liability and things, the skill sets are very, very different. The operational setting is very different. And so therefore, the combat medic is not really directly workplace ready until there's some retraining or some adapting to civilian practice. So military talent is apples and oranges. I know there's a lot of great tools out there that just says that these, if you type in your military occupational specialty, it will tell you the equivalency is this. And that sounds oversimplistic, and it is. It's actually more complicated than that when you look at skills, knowledge, abilities, task flow, leadership, management, those kind of things. So military talent is not necessarily directly applicable in many cases, but there is still an amazing value. And with the certification programs that are coming online, they're becoming more workplace ready before they take off the uniform. But this is a place where you still may have to do a little work and making these people more oriented and ready for your work. So then the question is, then what is the value of a veteran? If they don't have the exact skills I'm looking for, then why is it a good business decision to hire these people? Well, the talent that you're looking for initially is what we used to hire them, but the people that get promoted and retained in your organizations are people that have the soft skill kinds of things. So if you look at the capital perspective, we talked about human capital, the skills, knowledge, and abilities that they have that are directly related to your business. They may be, as I just said, maybe not directly ready. If you look at social capital, so if you look at a veteran's resume when they're applying for a position at your company, and you look at their references, I guarantee of the three or four down there, they're all going to be their military superiors. Most people in talent acquisition don't want their commander to say they're going to be a great engineer. They want an engineer who's out in the industry to validate that person's going to be a great engineer. So they lack social capital. If you pulled out anyone in the uniforms LinkedIn profile, probably 90% plus of all their connections are probably military-connected people. They don't know a lot of people in the civilian world because they're so immersed in their world, so they're not connected to people. 33% last year of positions were filled in America by employee referral programs. So if Messard Snell doesn't know anybody in some of these companies, how are they going to refer him? If all he knows is me, Tony, and everyone in uniform, and we're not in a company or industry that he's doing, how's he going to have the social connection to the workplace that's so vital to making these connections? So I'll skip the other things. I mean, the strengths are they're smart. It's been proven the cognitive ability of veteran talent is above, it's been measured scientifically above their non-veteran age-matched peers. So cognitive ability, and a lot of it has to do with entry thing. I mean, every person in the military has to be a high school graduate. There's like 60% or less of Americans today get a high school diploma or equivalency. So 100% of these people do. So, and that's indicative of not just of cognitive ability, but also character. So there's intellectual capital. These are smarter people to hire. They're very, very physically healthy. There's a national hysteria that every veteran has PTSD. So why would we bring these people into our workplace? They're a risk to us and others. That is completely false. I looked at all the data. Yes, this generation has twice the rate of disability, but it's well below the 30% level that would make that an issue in the workplace. They're not a risk to themselves or other people, unless it gets to the higher levels. So this whole generation is ready and healthy to work for you. The last thing I'd say, and I'll talk a little bit about this, is, I think I'll get back to that in a second, but this is a follow-up on the human capital thing. This is the science that proves that it's apples and oranges. There's two parts of human capital with the veterans. It's not just can you match, what did you do in the military, what can you do now? The second part of the question is, what will they do? And that's really the bigger problem. If you ask most people in uniform, what do you want to do when you take off the uniform? They don't really know. All they ever wanted to do, all I ever wanted to do was follow the third generation of my family, males of my family, and serve in the Army. I never really thought about what do I want to do when that's over. It's kind of ironic because we know 80% of people get out before they retire. We know those that retire are still young and healthy and we still work, but yet most people in the military haven't really thought about what's next. That's a huge component of this, and that's why the SAME things, the conferences, the panels that we do are helping inform what would you think about doing when you get out. This is a really good slide. I'm not going to brief the things on it, but this is what people call the soft value, the soft skills. But if you look at what veterans bring to your organization, these are compelling. These are very compelling qualities that every employer and every CEO wants in their people. And this slide alone, these figures, these statements here articulate exactly why you want to hire a veteran. And this is not advocacy because I am one. This is because these are great people that bring great things. They have great organizational abilities. They're supportive of distinctive work units and climates. They're very disciplined to task conditions and standards. They perform. If there's a safety thing, they're going to do it 1,000 times when no one's looking the right way. And other employees maybe don't have that value and that discipline. They're receptive to unit learning and doing new things. They naturally embrace the business unit cohesion and identity. They function on reciprocal relationships of trust. These are things generationally that these millennials don't sometimes have a hard time grasping. And most employers say, give me a veteran any day for these things, I'll train them the skills. But I can't train these things into these non-veterans who don't necessarily have these abilities and didn't have this formative experience of military that forged these qualities in them and makes it an active part of their work life. This is my last slide, and so what all that says is the veteran has to pay a high entry cost to enter the workforce. They may not be as competitive. When I have a veteran that's come, one of the Master Sergeant's veterans, and I have a college graduate, and they're both interviewing for the same job, my university spent 5 years getting that person ready for that interview. He may have a month or two to get that person, and they're competing against people. Again, it's entry cost. That veteran has to get themselves tuned up a lot faster and a lot better and by themselves than some of the people they're competing with. Military pay and compensation is about 30% higher than their civilian peer. We're asking every veteran to enter the workforce. They're going to take a significant pay cut, significant cut in benefits. We already said they may have to have some skills and go back to school, get some recertifications. That's an entry cost. We're putting an enormous burden on people who have already served their country, very demanding. Now we're seeing transition. Here's another cost you have to bear. And so I just say that to be empathetic, as Tony said from Tribe, we don't want to give these people sympathy because they don't deserve or want sympathy. They need empathy. We need to understand them. We understand what they're going through and recognize how their true value as great people. And then from that standpoint, that's when we start to work with them and give them gainful careers, employment, part of our communities. That's what it's all about. And thank you very much for your attention.
Good morning, everybody. Jason Snell, and I am a Big Red One soldier. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit here, have me up here, and talk about some of the actual requirements for a transition assistance program, not just on an Army level, but Department of Defense level. As Art had mentioned before, there is an issue with this. In the Army, we like to say, 5-6 years ago, whenever we still had the Army Career Alumni Program, it was basically 2 hooahs, a high five, and a kick on your backside as you exit military service. Like, thanks for serving, there you go. Good luck with the rest of your future and with your life, even though there's opportunities available to help you do well in your civilian lifestyle. Well, in 2011, unemployment compensation for the Army alone had capped at over $500 million. It was pretty significant. Okay, so of course, Congress had a little bit of an emotional event, and they came up with the Veterans Opportunity to Work Act. That was signed by the president in December of 2011. The good thing about that is when they came into this, they figured, well, we have to have minimum requirements, okay? And these minimum requirements are gonna be that warm handshake whenever service members exit the military to pursue civilian careers. Whether you've done 2, 10, 20, 30 years in the military, you still will have to get out and you will have to transition. And as Dr. DeGroat mentioned before, we don't really have this good crosswalk. We're always focused, being service members, we're focused on the mission, focused on getting the job done and everything that's associated with it, but we very rarely take time to focus on ourselves. Good thing about, and I know the other branches are doing this as well, but the Army finally jumped on the bandwagon, and they came up with the Soldier for Life program, and they said, hey, we have all these opportunities, let's use them. Presentation before this one, they mentioned the credentialing opportunities online for service members. Well, that's a very big proponent of it. Through all these different things, you got to figure out what the job is that I'm doing now, okay, what I want to pursue after I exit the military service, and how I bridge that gap, okay? It's called a crosswalk gap analysis. So with the Vow Act, they said there's 3 mandatory things. Okay, number one, you have to have a pre-separation counseling, basically to say, hey, this is what all you're going to be looking at over the next 12 to 24 months before you exit military service, okay, your transition window, and we're going to go ahead and line it out for you. These are all the things that you should be trying to achieve and accomplish. Then you come up your VA benefits briefings 1 and 2, right? Well, with that, what it is the VA benefits. Every service member as they exit the military are going to have some sort of VA benefits. Now, depending on the nature of their separation, they may not be entitled to some of those benefits, but they need to know that. And that's why that is a mandatory requirement. Department of Labor Employment Workshop, okay? We can go to promotion boards. We can be interviewed for different positions throughout the military. It's not the same as creating a resume, as networking and going and conducting a job interview for what your future career might be. So there's a lot associated with that. That's actually a 3-day class in the Army. It takes that long to figure everything out. People have mentioned LinkedIn, networking off of LinkedIn and setting that up. That is another big proponent in there. They teach you how to do it and really help you set it up, pave your way. Well, with the Vow Act requirements, of course, the Department of Defense is going to say, okay, so we have our requirements in addition to those Vow Act requirements, which are congressionally mandated. It's the law, so we have to do it, right? Nobody wants to go to jail for it. Not that they're going to send anybody to jail. So they came up with the DOD 1332.35. They printed that and signed it in 2012. And what this did is this added additional requirements for the transition program, or as you may be familiar with, DOD TAC. Transition overview just gives you that big perspective. Hey, this is what we're looking at when I transition. Kind of give you that idea how to make that that gap. Resilient transitions, okay? There's always stressors associated, as Dr. DeGroat mentioned. If anybody's familiar with the Gold Book, the Gold Book is a book that was developed, and it kind of just goes over the stressors associated with different things in the military that could contribute to suicidal ideations and completions. Well, at Fort Riley, the Big Red One came up with 2 additional items that are stressors. So you have the 12 stressors in the Gold Book, then you have the additional 2 that Fort Riley came up with. One of those additional 2 was transition, okay? Whenever you come into the military, it's basically 180 degrees of what you did in the civilian world. Well, it's going to be the same thing going back out, but you're not spending 16 weeks going every day working on that, or 12 weeks, or whatever the requirement was for you to come into the military service. So now you have to go the extra mile to figure out what it is. You have opportunities such as in the Army, we have the Army Career Tracker. It's an online tool which helps you establish and achieve goals for yourself and for your subordinates to kind of provide that glide path. Just like you do for your professional career development in the military, you can also do that preparing for yourself for that separation. And you can start doing that 180 days after you've entered active duty service. MOS crosswalk, I already mentioned that, okay? That's how you take your job skill in the military and apply that to what you want to do in the civilian workforce, okay? And if it doesn't apply, how can you bridge that gap? How can you meet the requirements to achieve what you want in the civilian workforce? Financial planning. Financial planning is another one. It's been mentioned previously. The big thing about the military, if you take the average E4 with dependents, about 4 years in the military, their salary is about or we'll say their wages are about $24 an hour, okay? That's including any kind of separate rations that you get, your base pay, clothing allowance. The one thing, and of course, your housing allowance, the things that it doesn't factor in are medical, dental, any kind of tuition assistance that you might receive from the military. So you take those, you add those in, and then you have to apply these costs. So you take that specialist that's getting out with 4 years or 5 years of service and has dependents, now they have to pay that medical, and bottom of the barrel medical coverage is going to be $400 a month. Where are they going to come up with that? So they need to build that budget, and they need to understand how to rebudget all their finances upon exiting the military. ITP review, okay, your individual transition plan. Day one up to day 180, 365, whatever it is, you're building that glide path. And then you have to work your way along that glide path and achieve those goals bit by bit to have a good outcome. And then capstone. Capstone is a mandatory requirement no later than 90 days from separation that you need to be complete with all of your transition requirements, okay? And this is mandatory. Congress, DOD, we all of us that put on the uniform fall under these requirements. The biggest connection is having the leadership to get involved and to have the time to invest in their subordinates. We are so mission focused and oriented on doing everything. Dr. DeGroat, he nailed it. He said, we are so focused on the mission, we don't take the time to prepare ourselves for that transition. And it is an issue. We have so many free opportunities available throughout the military to have that successful transition. We just have to take the time to apply it. And leaders have to invest in their soldiers the time to apply it for them. There are additional requirements, and they're not mandatory, but there are helpful tools to help continue that glide path for whatever your career path might be once you transition out. You have the higher education, you have your career technical training, which basically is certifications and credentialing, and then you have your entrepreneur track in case you want to start your own business. The biggest thing is the timeline. For retirees, 24 months prior to retirement, they can start the process. For soldiers that are just separating, you're looking at 12 months. Fort Riley, the commanding general actually developed a policy letter that extended that 12 months to 18 months, realizing that that's a very short window. Let's go ahead and spread it out. But then there's all kinds of opportunities available to help during that process. Career skills programs or internships. Okay, we have a very extensive network of these internships across the United States for transitioning service members. Not just soldiers, it applies to all service members. We've had Marines, we've had seamen, we've had airmen. We have a 10th Air Support ASOS on Fort Riley. So everybody goes through our program, and we help them out with these transitioning opportunities. There's a list of those 2 references that I talked about. It's in black and white. I will say that one thing to keep in mind is when you take this forward, this is not just, hey, I'm in the uniform and I'm trying to promote the regulations, because we all put on the uniform. We all are bound by regulations and by laws. Got it. The thing that is this is the driving force behind it. So if you don't have any kind of guidance, if you don't have any kind of ability to actually apply these tools and these methods, this is where you start. Okay, and from there, you just kind of build that. Wherever your duty station is, encourage you to network within your community. Get out and know the community. That local community is going to be your biggest support base. We have a very huge relationship with Kansas State University for the simple fact that, hey, they're coming in. Meeting with Tony Hofmann and his team with FSAME to come down to Fort Riley and provide quarterly transition panels to talk through veterans of all stages of the game coming in and talking to our soldiers, our service members, about, hey, these are some of the problems that we encountered whenever we were going through our transition, and this was our tools for success. And they've come down, and I think you kind of underbid the 500 soldier number, because I think that Fort Riley alone over the past 3-4 years has been around 500. But a phenomenal team. And I'll tell you, if you're not reaching out to your community to get that participation, you're just going to stop in the middle of the road. So once again, thank you very much for your time. Tamara's going to take over and talk about some credentialing. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome. My name is Tamara Olsen. I'm a 27-year Air Force veteran. I retired about a year and a half ago and went through the reintegration process. And it is a significant emotional event, no matter whether you've served 3 years, 15 years, 30 years. So what Tony has asked me to do is talk about our local post at the Pikes Peak region in Colorado Springs and some of the successes that we've had currently with Fort Carson. And I am quite confident that in saying veterans transition is not service specific. We all experience and encounter the same emotional events that are involved in those stages that Art talked about. These are my notes. I don't have slides. I have notes. And if I wasn't so old, I could probably read it on my watch, but I can't do that. I can read the time and my thing dings off when I have to go to a meeting or stand up. It tells me to stand up. You've been sitting too long, stand up. So some of the things that I've shared at Fort Carson, and I don't want to go into them today because I could truly talk all day and maybe a couple of days about the preparation, the methodical approach. I mean, we have all, as veterans, we've been given a task or a goal and an objective, and then usually, depending on which level you are at, you are allowed to develop a strategy to achieve those goals and objectives. Separating and leaving military service should be no different. It is an objective, plan for it. So I could talk all day about that. But what we're doing with the Pikes Peak post is bringing in transitioned veterans and talking to the soldiers. As of right now, we're trying to branch into Peterson and to the Air Force. You would think that would be easy for me to do. That seems to be challenging for some reason. The importance of doing that is to further SAME's objectives and bridging that gap between industry and government and furthering and fostering the relationship of what can SAME do to, it's really hard for me not to say SAME. Sorry, Nick, don't tattle on me, it's videotaped. And how we can support our local military installations. I will venture to guess that a majority of our military installations have an SAME post close by. So what we need to do, go back to our local posts, and if you have not, reach out to those military installations. It does not matter which branch of service you're at. And I don't think you have licensed the program. Bring this program to those installations and start developing that yourself. And this is the way that SAME, back at the local level, think globally, act locally, and let's catch fire with this and start helping our veterans in their transition process, whether 3 years, 15 years, 30 years, like I said. I'm gonna be short because I would love to be available to answer questions because I want us to talk about what you think is important and what you wanna ask. I'm also very involved with Adam on the enlisted committee, and I am also involved with the credentialing committee, and I'm very glad to see our strategic partners here with us today. So as Nick said in the previous session, there's a thread that weaves through all of this and how we can help our veterans and how SME can plug in. So thank you.
So just in recap, Art talked about the transition, what it entails from his studies. Jason talked about the Department of Defense requirements, et cetera. So industry kind of has an understanding of what short timeline for those transitioning military members they have. And Tamara talked about the linkage between SAME posts and installations, the opportunity that SAME has. Of that thread she talked about and what General Odlin and Neil Wright talked about earlier, we are at the base level of that. Our metric for success is simply get us bodies. We'll have veterans broken down by rank. We typically put the lower enlisted folks that have transitioned, mid-level folks, Army captains, Army, Air Force, Navy, or whatever, captains, officers or non-commissioned officers, and those 20 plus years, we break those down into those sections so it's more applicable that they have been in those shoes before. That's what we do at those panels for about 3 hours. And have a meaningful conversation. Metric for success is they leave there having a better understanding what they're really going to face during transition. So that finishes our panel. We've got some time for Q&A. please feel free to step up to the microphone and ask any questions. We've got at least about 10 minutes. So, yep.
All right, for the military in here, how many of you are reserve component? Okay, that's what I thought. So I want to make a couple of points, and really it gets after having great outcomes for this transition process. So for the early career, mid-career, transitioning soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, one of the things I think that, and I know you guys are doing it at Fort Riley. I transitioned out of Fort Riley in 1994. So I'm a reserve component, forward engineer support team commander. I've got architects, mechanicals, electricals. It's a real technical engineer unit reserve component. One of the things you talk about the cost of healthcare and so forth. So if we could keep them in the reserve component, TRICARE is $212 a month or $220 now for a family. So that reduces that cost. There's income for the reserve component sticking around. Plus, we've got this investment in this soldier, sailor, airman that we need to try to keep that expertise in the fold. The other side, when they go find their civilian job, there's now a network of other reserve component or National Guard in their unit that they can network with, and I've seen it a lot in my, I'm going on 24 years in the reserve component now, where, sergeant's talking to chief warrant officer, and I got a job over here, and they network that way, and they move into different careers. The other point that I'd like to make is, as we talk about transitions out of active component, Fort Riley, for instance, we've got, particularly on the officer side, we've got West Point grads, ROTC grads that have STEM degrees, and this is kind of on behalf of the regiment now, not USAR, but they might be in 11 series, infantry, field artillery. If they've got STEM backgrounds and they're leaving the field artillery or the infantry, the Office of the Chief of Engineers, we don't have a way to track who these people are, what their backgrounds are, and so we're losing them. They're going to work for Kiewit and all these ACE firms. We need to figure out a way as they transition, where you think you're gonna go. Oh, you've got a civil engineering degree from West Point, but you're an infantry officer? Let's figure out how to keep those folks. I've got 3 of them right now that we're working on getting them captain's career course, branched engineer. And they're going to school at USC and other places to get construction management. So a couple of ideas that helps the regiment, positive outcome, and then transition positive outcomes to think about. So.
I would respond maybe 2 ways, and thanks for sharing that. I think for those veterans that choose a dual career to continue to have military service, in this case in the reserve component, while they're pursuing private and commercial and civilian careers, that's wonderful. I would hope that they're doing that as a choice, not because they found they had no opportunities in the private sector, so therefore they're doing it out of necessity, not out of choice. And I think that's important. I do understand from the public good that continued service is in the best interest of our country, national defense. We as taxpayers pay a fortune for that talent, to curate that talent and want to maximize it. But sometimes the retention narrative is kind of hurting. The real reality is that these people want to do something completely different after the military service for the most part. If they have an opportunity, and we have a growing economy and a growing workforce that wants that talent. And if you look at generation after generation, civilian America was built by military talent transitioning. I mean, no further than the GI Bill. So sometimes, and again, it's your perspective is where you sit, and I'm with you on this. I work with all military recruiters on things like that. I believe in that for that part. But it's more important, I believe, that these 3.9 million veterans enter civilian careers and the workplace and move on and do something else. It's why we have the all-volunteer force. It's to move on and do other things and bring that talent to communities, to societies, to businesses, and there's our workforce is aging out, and we need that talent. I work with the Student Veterans of America. Their national platform, working with the VFW, is that same message. These are the leaders of tomorrow. Each generation of veterans is a leadership prepare for the next generation. So I would want to think broadly about that. And for those that we can keep, great. But for the most, they need to make this transition. And these companies, these firms, our communities need that talent and fully invested in community and civilian life.
I have found some of the transitioning military members have used the reserves as a good bridging gap as well, though. And just for the record, Colonel Dan Higgins is a West Point classmate of mine. I've asked him not to go into grade point averages from 1990 at West Point, so thank you. Other questions?
Hey, just real quick, sir, you're absolutely right, and that's one of the reasons why to this day Fort Riley still incorporates the reserve component with annual training, trying to give those transitioning service members other options and everything. We have a phenomenal team there. No, you're absolutely right, sir. Thank you.
Todd Stone, Stone Group Architects in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I'm exactly what you were speaking about, sir. Retired Master Sergeant, went to school for architecture, now own a firm, 3 locations in Upper Midwest. We'd hire veterans all day, every day, but it seems like we're talking about a low-density MOS here. We're talking about a low-density criteria of soldiers, whether they're enlisted or commissioned, coming out of the military, having the appropriate degree, having the experience. When we go to find those type of people, we can't find them. So there's our struggle. How do we get connected with this program? How do we get to where private industry is talking better with those transitioning teams and connect the people with the work?
I'll address that a little bit. I mean, part of what we're doing at the national level, I think Nick will nod north and south on this, this is a start of that process, okay, with what General Odland's doing to address the skill shortage in the construction industry, not just with low-density MOSs, okay? And so SAME is going to play a leading role in that. I think we're at the really infant stages of that, but I guess that's my best answer to your question at this point. Tamara?
Right, and also, like I had mentioned, reaching out to your local SAME posts. That's going to be your first touch point. But we want to, at the national level, provide those tools, techniques, and procedures for the local posts to execute those.
One other thing. So as a member of the Transition Assistance Program, I will tell you, not just with SAME, but you have to connect those dots. Whatever your local post is with SAME, also communicate with that installation transition center, okay? Because they are going to connect the dots. Just like with what, the Kansas City Post and Pikes Peak Post have done with their local installations. Hey, let's go ahead, connect the dots with that transition program, find a point of contact, and get that worked in there. And we've established such a huge network. I can't even tell you how big it is, but people just keep coming in, businesses keep coming in, and that's what we need, both for your businesses and for our service members.
For the sake of time, I want to make sure we keep this to 11:30. I'm about 30 seconds out. So we will be here to answer any questions you want to talk about afterwards. I think most of us will be. Appreciate your attention. It's a very important topic. It's one piece of a very, very big puzzle. And we're here to help work forward to help transitioning veterans with a more successful transition. That's what we're doing. Even at the lowest level, at the post level. So appreciate your attention. If anybody here wants to talk about the post level piece and getting integrated with military installations, come talk to me, please. This will be up there for a while. The other thing I do is I want to put a plug in for Art. Art has an endowment with the Kemper Foundation. And Art, if you could really briefly explain that for local companies that are interested in this program. So. Yes,
the Kemper family owns Commerce and UMB Banks, St. Louis to Kansas City. They're underwriting for 5 years for me to develop, which I've already done, and offer free veteran talent acquisition workshops, working with businesses and firms with their talent acquisition people, provided that there's some C-suite executive who says, I'm committed to hiring veterans, but we want to know how to retool ourselves to do that, because they've realized they've tried unsuccessfully, like your comment. Where is the talent pool? What pond do I cast into to find these fish? And then, so I've built out a pretty comprehensive program to teach, and I've done this 4 or 5 times or 8 times with big companies, so it's been tested. And so if anyone is in a Kansas City or reasonable area, St. Louis, and wants a packet, I brought about 6 or 7, there's a prospectus in here, and then also a actual instruction plan on what kind of HR things you need to know. And so I'll offer that to anybody that's interested.
And that completes our panel. Thank you.